Hey you, and welcome to my channel. My name is Tina and my aim is to improve your drawings just like others have done for me when I just started out. In today's video, it's all about getting this commissioned brown Labrador down on paper. I chose to work with soft pastels for my underlayer in this case because I had a whole array of colors that would work really well with Bo the dog. I always work together with clients to find a perfect background, and in this case we settled on a very neutral background that has a small halo effect. I already added this background, so now it's time to add some colors for the underlayer of the star of this portrait. I decided to block out some areas first with a dark shade of brown. Areas around the ear, under the chin, the neck on the left side, around the eyes, and in general areas that have more shade to them. After that I used a light warm brown with some red tones in it on the left ear. This was a little bit trial and error because I decided it was going to be a little bit too red, so I just muted it back down with a dark brown and then got to blending. I added some more of that dark brown and then I just played with the amount of pigment on the paper already. As you can see, the neck on the left side is way more pigmented than the area above the eye. All in all, I ended up with a very simple first base layer. To darken some areas up, I'm going to add some black soft pastel. You don't need to add much here to create a darker brown. And even though pan pastel does a better job at mixing colors, soft pastel does this as well. So instead of picking a different darker brown, I just decided to use my own base brown and just make it a shade darker wherever needed. The only thing you need to pay attention to when building your underlayer with the soft pastels is the following. When working with soft pastels, they disperse a lot of pigment, so in order not to clog up your paper too fast, you already need to apply this as lightly as possible. After getting in the black and outlining the shade some more, I was happy with my underlayer and ready to start on some more detailed work. For this drawing, I decided to look in my drawers and use some of the materials I don't use as often or never. Just in case my wife ever asks if I need all of these supplies, I can honestly answer that I use it all. So on the pastel sticks. Again, just like with my soft pastel, I have a very nice selection of brown pastel sticks that match this subject perfectly. I used some of them to start on the fur before I felt like I was missing my pencils, so the use of my pastel sticks didn't last long, but hey, at least I can say that I used them. I used a mix of colors on the left ear, mainly adding in some light color around the ear where the light hits it most. And then a mix of a very dark brown and a warm brown to add some more definition inside the ear. Now the fur here is on the short side, yet it isn't as defined, so I just add some strokes here and there, and this makes it look as though there is quite some fur there, yet in a very subtle way. The top part of the head is built with that light brown and dark brown, and on the left side here I actually used black since it's a very shaded area. I'm using relatively large strokes that have a curve to them as I draw them more towards the center of the head. Always keep in mind when building fur that you follow the natural curve of the area. I am making this a little bit lighter by going over it with a lighter color, but it doesn't need a lot. More towards the ear I actually darken it up. Now the ear casts a harsh shadow on the head, so I'm just going to glaze a bit there with black to darken it up. And I just blend this out a little bit with my finger, and so far I'm happy with how it looks. Next I'm gonna jump to the left side of the body. Again, I start with a light brown to add in some relatively large strokes right up till I reach the darker area. To make sure the transition into the darker area is smoother, I also add darker strokes starting in the dark area and moving into the lighter area. I'll repeat this process here just with some darker browns. By now I darkened up the area I was working on a little more and I have moved it up a bit. I'm going to start on the area around the eye, where I first adjusted my underlayer by making it a bit warmer. Next I'm adding some black fur to it with my black pastel stick. Woohoo! I knew they would come in handy. Again, my first strokes are following the curve of the dog's head, which I created by adding multiple shorter strokes that look like bigger strokes. A big pro of these sticks, by the way, is that you can create very thin lines. Then I'm starting on one of my favorites, the eyes. Now, since I'm working on a paper sheet sized A3, I have a little bit more room to add in some detail there. I first start by adding in the reflection on the lower eyelid and making the area a little lighter in general. For this, I first started with black to add in the pupil and some of the black on the outside of the eye. Now my fingers are a little bit too blunt to get some accurate blending, so I used a small blending stump instead. My base color for the eye is an orangey red. This is something I color pick to make sure that I could match it as close as possible. and the little squiggly lines that are in the iris are done with a bright warm orange. I'm also adding in just a splash of dark red and dark brown to mute down a bit of that orange. I'm going to repeat this a few times while I change the colors I use a bit. Now for the highlight, I first use the bright blue, which ends up more toned down because of the black underneath it, and then just add in my white highlight on top of that. I also need a little bit of highlight on the right side where it catches the light, and I'm happy with this result. On to the muzzle, where I start by adding these dots, which is where the whiskers come from. But I decided to adjust the colors above it first. I just felt like it needed to be a bit warmer, so for this I added a few strokes with a warm reddish dark brown. And I made the area here a little bit more reddish by glazing on top of it. And then I was back in with pastel sticks. The fur here was a bit brighter, so I used a light pink here, just getting in some fur around the dots I made earlier. Of course, leaving it like this would be too harsh, so I muted back down by blending it out a little bit with my fingers. And I'm going over this again with the pastel stick to darken it up just a little, and with this I'm going to work my way up the muzzle. I'm adding quite a bit of this to the corner of the muzzle on the right side of the eye to create the depth needed there. I also used it on the forehead. Now the center of the head is relatively light, so there I'm going back to that light color I used earlier. The direction should be more curved at the top and more straight as it moves towards the muzzle. Now for the muzzle itself, I'm using very short strokes here with just a bit of a curve to them. And then I'm going to repeat myself again by adding some black fur on top. The next part is mostly just darkening it up, so I'm just going to skip this a little bit. And I just took a step back to see if I wanted to push some values, which was indeed the case with my highlights. As you can see, I added more definition below the lips and I pushed my values more on top of the muzzle. Finally, time to start on the right side of this drawing. I'll start building the fur there again with this light color. Nothing too fancy here, as it just mimics the other side for the most part. For the nose, I'm first going to darken it up here, and then I'm going to add in the nostrils with black, and you also see me making that dividing line. This dog's nose has a warm brown feel, so I'm going to fill it up with a dark brown first, and then I'll go on top of this with a dark warm red. Just add a bit of black on the lower side and above to make sure that where the highlight of the nose is, it will be lighter, which you can see as I blend this out. I even darkened the bottom part up some more. Right now it's a little bit too red for my liking, so I added a mix of a dark and a light grey to mute this back down without making it much darker. I just wanted to make the saturation a little bit less. This is where grey comes in handy. And then I'm going to add these dots. When it comes to colors, I actually made a video on color theory which explains some principles, like for example with this grey. By now I have finished adding the dots with grey, and I added some with dark red as well. I'm going to add in some highlights right underneath the nostrils with white. And I'm even adding this to the nose itself to make it much brighter. Then, if you can see this clearly enough, I used the black pastel stick to add those crackling lines that you can see on top of dogs' noses. But looking at it now, I lost a little bit too much of its red sheen, so I'm going to fix that by going over it once more. Right now I'm way more happy with how this looks. Starting on the last part of the drawing, although I'm sure I will go back to my nose again, I'm going to repeat myself here for the most part, so I'll just talk a little bit about this portrait. The dog you see painted here is Beau, which is French for beautiful, which was a really suited name for this cutie, I believe. He sadly passed away recently, which is why his owner commissioned me to draw a portrait of him. I sincerely hope that this portrait brings them joy and can help to keep the memory of this beloved furry family member alive forever. This is some of the work that brings me a lot of fulfillment, since you know that you are creating something that will be treasured by someone for a very long time. One more thing to mention about this one is getting the colors right wasn't easy. In the beginning I mentioned that I had a lovely choice of colors to work with for my underlayer, which is true, but only applies for the soft pastels. When it came to my pastel pencils, I didn't really have the exact colors to match the burgundy and orangey red values of this portrait. This is why you see me going over it lots of times with a mix of warm and red or orange tinted browns. Sometimes I glaze over it, but mostly by adding a layer of strokes I can bring my values more to where I need them to be. Little side note, if you like my video so far, make sure you subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. This way you'll immediately see my video each Friday when it releases. These are mostly tutorials like this video. You'll also make me a very happy creator by growing my small channel. And a little bit about this light blue pencil that I'm using here. The fur catches a lot of light, so I definitely need to add some more highlights. Using white would work, but it would also be a little bit dull, so I chose to use a light blue. Since it's a lighter color, the result will be a lighter tone in the underlying pastel. Blue is a complementary color for this reddish underlayer, which will provide a higher contrast. So together the colors will appear brighter and more prominent. And adding blue makes it look like the light cast on the dog is from a blue sky, thus making it look more interesting. If you liked this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, and I thank you for watching. I hope to see you again next Friday, and in the meantime, have a great week.